Welcome, everyone. My name is Larry Metter. I'm the channel chief at Cavelo. And thank you for joining us because today's panel is probably, one of the most pressing issues that are facing businesses today. And that is cyber insurance and the due diligence required to get cyber insurance and not only get it, but also keep it. And as we all know, the cyber threat landscape evolves daily. Actually, it's probably evolving hourly, it's evolving all the time. Insurance carriers are also becoming much more stringent, and rightfully so. But for many businesses, the path to insurability still feels like you're kind of navigating a maze of security controls, questionnaires, technical unknowns. We're going to hopefully unpack what due diligence really means, how it's evolving, and what practical steps organizations can take to align themselves or align their cybersecurity practices with insurance expectations. And today is going to be, this is kind of an interesting one for me as well, because many of you may realize that, I'm the channel chief here at Cavelo, but in a former life, I was the channel chief over at DataStream. So I've worked very closely with Max in the past, and I obviously work very closely with James. So I'm kind of excited about this. I think we're going to be able to have some fun. And I welcome both James and Max, and let's get this on the road and talk about why exactly did Cavelo and DataStream partner? There we go. We got James and Max real quick. I'm going to turn it over to y'all in just a second. But, to me, why did we partner? It kind of made sense. At the time, I had left DataStream, but I was not with Cavelo. And I got turned on to Cavelo and I saw what they did. And I said, wow, this is pretty interesting stuff. I think the folks over at DataStream would be interested in what Cavelo's doing because it really relates to helping people get cyber insurance and keep that cyber insurance. So I made an introduction, and lo and behold, here we are today. Now, I never figured I'd be moderating a panel between my current employer and a former employer. But, like I said, I think we're going to have some fun with it. So, Max, I'm going to turn it over to you first. Thanks for joining us. Hope everything's well in Philly. And, why don't you tell us a little bit more about DataStream and what makes DataStream different from all the others that are out there? Is there a secret sauce that you've got that you can share? But, just kind of tell us how you differ and what you do.
Yeah. Thanks, Larry. It's always fun having a moderator who's in some sense in quantum superposition with everyone on the panel. You're sort of involved with everyone, Larry, which is great. So DataStream, I guess, we've been around now in the channel for the last over 4 years now, coming on 5. We really want to make cyber insurance, which can be a complex, thorny process, as simple as possible for IT service providers, MSPs, MSSPs, and the like, as well as their customers going through that. Obviously, I think cyber insurance is a phenomenal product in general for making the world a safer, more secure place. That's what insurance is here to do. But the cyber process in particular does have a lot of challenges and can seem quite tricky, especially for folks that haven't gone through it before. That's where all of our technology platforms and resources really try to help. We make it very easy for partners to manage loads of their customers' applications simultaneously. We try to provide easy explanations in our platform for questions, suggested limits, lots of other parts of the process, and more or less, hopefully, are a helping partner in the trenches of getting your customers insured, which makes you safer as an MSP. I'll stop it there for now, but that's a little bit of who we are and what we do.
Cool. Thank you, Max. I appreciate it. And James, Cavelo is a relatively new platform. We've been around for a few years now, but many are just really starting to hear about us. So I'd love for you to dig into your background, what you've done in the past, and how you view Cavelo or how you view the Cavelo and DataStream relationship as it pertains to helping MSPs and MSSPs.
Sure. Thanks, Larry. So a little bit of my background. I actually started my entrepreneur career as an MSP. We acquired an MSP, grew that business, and ended up creating cybersecurity offerings. At the time, it was more around penetration testing and things like that. And then I ended up selling that business off. So I have an appreciation for the MSP community. I really believe in that type of partnership, and when building out the product that we have today, which I'll talk about in a second, we just wanted to keep that in mind. The next company I had was a company called Root Secure, where we ended up getting acquired from another company called Arctic Wolf, and they're in the MDR space, and we were doing vulnerability management. And quickly, just a little bit about Cavelo, and I'll talk about the DataStream and Cavelo partnership. We created a platform specifically for MSPs, built for MSPs with multi-tenancy to help MSPs have cybersecurity offerings. We do data discovery and classification. We do a vulnerability management. We do configuration management. We do asset discovery. And so by bringing all that information together, it tells a story. There's a lot of telemetry information. And what's interesting about the partnership with DataStream, what we found was we were getting pulled into a lot of DD questions around cybersecurity renewals. And so, and I'm sure Max can talk about this in more depth, but what we found was the questions that were being asked upon the renewals, they were more stringent than ever before. And it wasn't necessarily a nice to have, it was a need to have. And the reason why is because obviously claims were going up, and let's be honest, insurance companies want to make money. And I'd say the last piece, like just as important, we want to try to, all of us want to prevent a data breach from taking place. And so when it came to the DataStream partnership, I looked at it as an opportunity to, instead of getting involved in the renewals, we can get involved at the very beginning. And so what that means is easy access to DataStream's portal and being able to offer that to all our MSPs. And what you're going to find is with us, if you looked at the requirements, we checked the box for many different requirements on the cybersecurity and compliance side, which is absolutely great. One platform, and we combine the two groups to be able to work together and really streamline this for our customers.
Awesome stuff. And I'm glad you mentioned that portal. We're going to take a look at that a little bit later on as we go. But James, thank you so much. I do appreciate it. And, we've talked about why we partner, but now let's talk about how the cyber insurance landscape has kind of evolved. And I've got a little commentary. This goes back to when I first started working with DataStream. I've been in the channel for a long time, but I started with DataStream back in 2021. And the conversation that I was having as we would go to various events and talk to the MSPs, that conversation was really different back in 2021 than what it evolved to when I left there in 2023. And the difference was in 2021, when I was talking to the MSPs, they were kind of like, why did you go to a cyber insurance company? We don't like cyber insurance. Cyber insurance doesn't pay out. It's the enemy of the MSP. So, I took this information back to DataStream and I said, okay, here's what I'm hearing. And so it was really an educational process that had to be done. And, we had to talk about the difference between good policies and bad policies. We had to talk about the difference between perhaps a rider on a business owner's policy versus a true standalone cyber insurance policy, which is what everyone really wants to have. So by the end of my tenure at DataStream, at the end of 2023, MSPs were really starting to take a look at cyber insurance, and they realized what we were trying to tell them, and that is cyber insurance really is the ally of the MSP. It's going to enable the MSP to sell more technology and perhaps even sell that technology faster because it's going to be required by their customers' carriers as they try to get cyber insurance policies. So essentially what I'm trying to say is it feels like, at least to me, cyber insurance has become more trusted in our channel over the past few years. But Max, I kind of wanted to throw this out to you. hopefully you agree with what I said there. And if you want to add some additional color to that, you certainly can. But how have insurers improved how they assess risk, how they price their various policies, and is this becoming are the models that they use becoming more data driven? And if so, how does that data relate to what we can provide with Cavelo?
Yeah, it's great question. Thanks, Larry. Yeah, so I'll try not to go too nerdy and talk about the history of insurance for overly long, as I'm sure that's what everyone likes to do with their free time. But in a nutshell, and the physicist in me always likes to start by defining our terms a little bit. For anyone, again, like very new to the cyber insurance, it's an insurance product like anything else. Like you would buy an auto insurance policy for your car. Businesses, organizations, schools buy cyber insurance to cover them with various limits and deductibles for cyber incidents that fall under those coverages. Larry's totally right. Cyber insurance in particular, is still considered, I think, sort of a teenager now as a product. It's not a baby anymore like it was when it was first created in the late 90s, or again, when some people started to hear about it more like 2010, 2015. But it still is, relatively speaking, a new insurance line compared to fire, auto, all kinds of like historical insurance products that have decades and decades of really, really good data. People were releasing cyber insurance products with almost no data when this first started, which means that they weren't very good at knowing what signal would actually lead to companies being riskier or not. So over the evolution of cyber insurance as a product, you've seen, I think, a convergence of carriers on asking very good security controlled questions that are not perfect, but give a good proxy of a good versus a bad risk. And it's tied to now pretty good data on historical losses. I think you've also seen that, yes, trust in the overall product hopefully has gone up. I think that's the sense we get as well. And yeah, some of those big boogeyman fears, like insurance never pays out, like there are, just to, if some people still think that, there are entire regulatory bodies that would be yanking products from the shelf if they actually didn't pay out. They're pretty, this kind of is something that exists for insurance in general, but there are people making sure that there's high degrees of ethics in the background of all these things. So these are not vaporware products. And I think people also recognize that the questions that are being asked, they lean heavily on good security frameworks. Some questions literally are coming from things like CIS. And I think you can see that overall insurance is almost becoming a new type of risk framework. It's very much correlated to measure expected financial, losses and implications of cyber events, but it's helping set the standard for defining what good security posture looks like if you were having to pay out losses for that kind of a company. So I think so that's kind of a quick, nutshell history, I think, of a bit of the product's evolution. I think underwriters and carriers are getting better at measuring the risk. I think where it's going now, and that's where DataStream wants to be, and why partnerships with Cavelo are so interesting, is we want to get better than just questionnaire data. We want to keep working with really good cybersecurity vendors, because ultimately we're ensuring a highly technical system. We need better, more granular cyber posture data that you don't accidentally select the wrong drop down in a questionnaire. Where we'd love to go is just like how cars now can monitor how the driver is driving on the road, and that influences their pricing. We're not there yet with cyber insurance, but the future, I think, of this product is that insurance is going to keep getting more tightly linked with the good security providers out there. And that's the exact type of interconnections we're trying to get ahead of as a brokerage, and why we're, again, very excited working with Cavelo.
Max, you mentioned the frameworks in cyber insurance. So let me ask you a question, then we're going to come back to James and talk to him about it as well. But does following a recognized framework like NIST or CIS controls, does it improve an organization's chances of getting insured, or does it help them get a better premium, or no? Because I've actually heard a few people say, well, I'm following this, so I'll automatically be able to qualify for cyber insurance. And I've tried to tell them, yeah, it's going to set you up pretty good, but it doesn't guarantee that you're going to get approved.
Yeah. I know I said I wasn't going to keep just rattling on about insurance, but I guess I'll just do it again. We mentioned this before too, that again, insurance has changed as people have gotten smarter, and as also different things have hit the world, right?
Yeah.
2021, we saw ransomware really cause a lot of losses in the insurance community. So a bunch of security, would be nice to have. MFA became pretty much a hard requirement to even get quotes, right? So following frameworks is a good way of ensuring, again, that you're not going to be completely blindsided and sort of get denied when you're taking your application out to a bunch of different carriers, because in general, your posture and the questions that end up in a lot of cyber insurance applications are quite aligned with the various frameworks. It's not exactly word for word, but really high correlation there. But what can surprise people, again, is that there are parts of you as a company which are kind of like a little bit more immutable. If you are a large bank, you are never going to pay a low cyber insurance premium if you're getting any decent limit, because you are just a bigger attack surface with bigger potential losses. So yes, if you are following frameworks and you're doing the right security things, if we took all the companies like you, you should always be getting more favorable pricing or availability of better types of products. But you do have to take into account the type of company you are right from the get-go. There are still some types of companies which are quite hard to insure in general. Like if you decide to start your own cryptocurrency and form a company around that, there are certain industry verticals which are just tough to get insurance for in general. MSPs themselves are more complex risks and have to go through a slightly different insurance process, as another example. But in general, yes, if you are following good battle-tested frameworks and your company is doing the right things, then you should get good pricing for the type of company that you are, and you should get good quotes for the type of company that you are. But that doesn't mean you are going to pay $1,000 or less for $1 million cyber insurance policy. It depends on, again, your size, your industry, and some other stuff that are a little outside your control.
Nope, that's great info. Thanks, Max. And so, James, I know you got a whole lot to say on some of this, but how can organizations use framework-based assessments to demonstrate due diligence? And then we're going to jump into due diligence as we go. So, what do you got to say there?
So I think frameworks are usually designed specifically for, and Max talked about this, a company that's doing, it's in a certain vertical. So if you talk about banks, the SEC is that, right? And typically speaking, they're not necessarily doing it because of cybersecurity. They're doing it because they have to stay in business, to do what they need to do. When it comes to, like, for example, NIST, which is a broader one, I think I see a lot of companies adopting that because they look at that as best practice, right? And I think at the end of the day, understanding what are we really trying to achieve, we're really trying to achieve lower risk and try to attempt to defer a data breach from taking place. And I think at the end of the day, there's going to be various different frameworks, and there's never going to be one, unfortunately. And but one of the things that is very common, if you actually spend the time to read some of these, and I don't recommend it unless you have some wine or something, but there's a lot of common themes with it, right? And so if you take those common themes and then you look at from a best practice standpoint, and then that applies to the due diligence from a cybersecurity insurance standpoint, usually checks the box. Like, and I find, it really depends again, are you a bank? Are you a municipality? What kind of a target are you? Your attack surface, of course, Max brought that up. I think with your attack surface, if there's more of an attack surface, then obviously there's just more of a threat for something bad to happen all around. But coming back to, like, at the end of the day, we're really trying to deter bad things from happening. And so one other comment I'll make about cybersecurity insurance in general, and Max talked about it already, but when it first came out, I would say the policies weren't very mature. No one really understood what they meant. I saw a lot of companies getting cybersecurity insurance thinking that's all they needed to do, and they weren't doing anything else. So And then when they get a renewal, they find out there was a breach, usually ransomware, and whether or not it got paid or not, I find it usually does. But then upon the renewal, that's when they're like, no, you weren't doing best practice. And so when it comes to cybersecurity insurance, it's a tool in your cyber security practice that is overlapping the best practices. And so I always like to look at what's your liability, right? And I think this is really what it comes down to is in a perfect world, if we knew what the risk was and the potential liability, then you would be able to say, okay, let's get a policy for $5 million. It doesn't necessarily work that way, but you can double up and you could have cybersecurity insurance as a backup, and it needs to be as a backup. What if my first line defense fails? And what if I have to pay ransom or anything like that?
So I always end up making really stupid analogies, and I wouldn't be me if I didn't do that. So I've got to make one here. And to me, cyber insurance without due diligence is kind of like insuring a car that has no brakes. You just don't do it. So let's jump into due diligence. And James, why? Okay, look, Cavelo does a whole lot of things, right? So we've got data discovery, we've got asset discovery, we've got configuration management, vulnerability management. We've also got identity access management. So there's a whole lot of stuff. But why is visibility into sensitive data and the assets that are on a client's network or within their system? Why are those such a key part of the due diligence process? Sorry about that.
Yeah, first off, let's just talk about why it's so complex. It used to be that you had a server, it was a file server with all your files on it. You would log in to that server, usually in an office, and it's connected with a LAN and a WAN, and then there's VPN. So all the data was in one central spot, or more central than today. Now you've got cloud computing, and it's not just cloud computing like Office 365. It's everywhere, Box, Dropbox. And then you have your personal cloud computing, right? And it's really hard to keep those separate. My point is data is everywhere. People are working from home. And so it's gotten to a point where it's absolutely, I'll say it's out of control. We've done some, we've had some customers say they know where all their data is and they're surprised when they don't. And that's normal. But at the end of the day, if you don't know where your data is, how are you going to protect it? And then most importantly, we talked about attack surface management. I like to look at it as a multi-dimensional view into your attack surface. It used to be that you would look at your data in a linear model. It was like, this is what we do to all the data, and you call it a day. The challenge right now is there's data everywhere and there's so much of it. You can't look at it like that. All or one is not the way it works in today's world. You have to look at what's the liability of that risk of that data leaving or being exfiltrated. For example, some folks might have access to intellectual property that is absolutely critical to your company. And if that's your critical data, then you're going to do something different on a cadence standpoint around remediation and making sure that the proper controls are put in place than if it was data that you just don't care about. And so, I think it's gone to a point where it's just a key component of your cyber practice. And it's a starting point too.
And looking at that data, it's if I'm not mistaken here, it's not just a snapshot at any point in time. You got to really have that continuous data discovery, that continuous asset discovery. Am I correct in that assumption?
Yeah. So at the end of the day, both your assets and your data, it doesn't stay the same. People are actively working, and 80% of breaches happen because of human errors. And so what we find is someone accidentally saves as and puts it on a personal Dropbox versus in OneDrive or whatever it might be. That's the stuff that you just can't catch on a one-time audit. It's got to be continuous because it's a moving target.
Yep, absolutely. And we've got a question from the audience, from George, that kind of goes right in line with what we're talking about. And I'm going to actually kind of pose this question over to Max and James. Feel free to comment on it. But George was asking, are insurers beginning to favor continuous monitoring and real-time telemetry over traditional annual assessments when they're evaluating risk? So great question, George. And Max, I'm going to throw that one to you first, and then we'll come over to James for some commentary.
Yeah, it's a very good question. Like I said a little bit earlier, absolutely, I would be shocked if that's not the future of where cyber insurance is going to be. But maybe not surprising to hear, insurance is not the industry that adopts technology the fastest. It can be a bit set in its ways. So at the moment, most carriers are still using exactly what sort of George was laying out, something like a traditional annual assessment, which is a fancy way of saying they ask a bunch of questions and someone needs to answer them, and the answers need to be accurate, or that can cause problems down the line. But you can see, I would say, baby steps towards something like more of a continuous monitoring world of the future. There are products and carriers now that essentially are doing, let's say, like near real time scans of your externally facing assets, and will bring up issues that they find, especially if there's like a new vulnerability that comes out, and sometimes have stipulations in place for the insured policyholders where they're agreeing to, in a timely manner, patch highly critical new things that come out. And so if the carrier comes to them and says, hey, something new came out, you are affected by this, you need to patch this, and they don't do it and then have an issue, they can potentially be liable for that. So there are versions of this. And there are also new either warranties or insurance products, which are like linked intrinsically to just better data, essentially closer to like real-time network data. I would be surprised also if that trend slows down. I think it makes a lot of sense. Basically, people releasing products which by definition are only really available when a certain level of data is also available to make, again, risk decisions. But it's still not the standard. Right now, if you went to us or your local insurance broker, the majority of policies, you're still going to go through something like a questionnaire process. But I think that is where people recognize the future is going to be.
Yeah. James, any commentary on that?
Yeah, I guess I look at them as kind of two separate things. I think the continuous world, and that's where for MSP comes into play, to on a continuous basis look at your cyber risk and do something about it, right? And then the annual is kind of your state and church check, right? So at the end of the day, what I find that I see is you will always have the kind of one-time audit just to make sure everyone's, like, it's a third-party audit, right? Like, humans make mistakes, MSPs make mistakes, and customers make mistakes, right? It gives you that kind of view into saying, are we doing the right thing? You think about a financial audit, it's the same thing. You're doing it annually, but you still need to continue to monitor your finances throughout the year. You want to make sure you have cash flow and make sure that your liabilities and your assets are correct. It's the exact same thing when you look at cyber practice on the MSP and cybersecurity insurance side, from my perspective.
Yeah, James, I was going to ask you another question about, what's one thing a company can start doing right now to improve their cyber due diligence procedure? But you've kind of answered that. Is there anything else that you want to add to that somebody could be doing right now to improve their due diligence procedure or posture?
Yeah, so I mean, I look at it like our customers are MSPs, and they are really good at doing that, right? And so I think from their customer standpoint, talking to an MSP and making sure that you're understanding the different cybersecurity practices that they offer. I mean, at the end of the day, you don't have to start with you don't have to start with everything. Max brought up MFA. Everyone should be using MFA. Like, there's certain table stakes in this world where it's like, even vulnerability management, everyone should be doing vulnerability management. It's like, 20 years old. And so, we used to do like pen tests and things like that. And it just, it's common sense. It makes sense. You should be encrypting your files. You should be using VPN. But taking a step back, I think really it's understanding at a company level, what's the risk and what's the budget that you're going to accept as a company. And so what I always say, it really has to start at the executive level and board level, because those are the ones that are responsible from a fiduciary duty standpoint. It's not actually the IT person in most cases, unless they're a director of some sort. And so, you're never going to be 100% secure. But understanding what you're willing to take as a risk is, I think, the starting point, and documenting that. And so that baby steps forward and continually reviewing and changing the goal is what everyone wants to see.
Yep. Great stuff. Thank you, James. And Max, I got one more question for you. I also want to make sure we leave enough time for you to kind of show that portal and maybe take some questions from the audience. But if a business is planning on applying for cyber insurance or renewing their cyber insurance, let's say in the next 6 months, what should they be doing right now?
Yeah, and I'll answer that too. And I just want to come back on a couple of things I think
Sure.
James was saying too, which were all really good points. I think like something I appreciate is like a lot of the lens of this conversation in general is about risk management broadly. And I think the due diligence process writ large, right, is meant to manage the various risks a business faces, which are not purely security. There are legal risks, which is why sometimes you have to even do some of the due diligence you do, or also like commercial risks too, right? And it is finding the right balance and making sure you're covered as a business. And that does look different. And it does take, I think some of that awareness, like James was saying as well, is why a version of like annual checks are always going to be required. Because as much as I love technology and, hopefully can build our technology a little bit better every day, some of this stuff is never going to come straight out of a platform. You need people thinking about it and making sure that they're covering what they need to for a business. And I think the mix of better and better technology for doing what humans are not very good at doing, which is keeping a million different endpoints, vulnerabilities, et cetera, in your head. Very hard to do that. And that's where I hope we just get better and better data coming from the technology directly into the insurance community. So we understand that big scale, highly technical data better and how that aligns with good risks. But there's never going to be some magic platform that captures all of your legal risks, what data qualitatively is the most important to your business. Therefore, you need like extra coverage around it. Some of this stuff really has to be still a human process. And you're asking earlier, I mean, I guess, what can you start doing now? I think in some way, going through the cyber insurance process is a good form of due diligence in and of itself, because it kind of forces you to ask some basic questions that you can be surprised, like about, like, James was talking earlier too. Oh, some companies truly don't understand the full scope of the resources they have when it comes to data and other things. Forcing you to take a bit of that inventory is really useful. And even past that, insurers are asking questions not just tied to the frequency of you having an incident or a breach, but they also want to limit how big that thing is, because the bigger the loss, obviously they're potentially on the hook for more money. So checking for things like disaster recovery, have you tested that? Incidents response, do you actually know who to talk to, or even where to look up your carrier information, especially during a bad thing that's happening, when your IQ points drop a little bit because you're like nervous and panicked. Like going through the process so that you kind of have a keep it simple, stupid process for dealing with bad things when they happen is also quite good, but not a lot of people have necessarily vetted that. So yeah, I think something, obviously, like we talked about the table stakes of security. If you're missing some of those right now, you should be, we're probably talking a lot to MSPs here that know the good table stakes, and if anything, are trying to make sure they're guiding, clients to do those things. But outside of that, I think going through all of your human processes around dealing with the bad things that could happen. So having a BIA, so a business impact assessment, having a disaster recovery plan, having an incident response plan that's actually filled out. Again, some simple things, but these will be asked later if you were to go through the insurance application process anyway. But are some of the stuff that you can save time and not have to spend an extra couple weeks putting these things together if you don't have them. When you realize, oh crap, I'm gonna be paying a lot more money for this policy if I get it because I didn't do any of this stuff. Something like that would probably be partially my answer. Yeah.
No, that's great stuff, Max. Thanks so much. And James, any commentary on what Max just said?
You know, it's interesting. I think Max and I agree on a lot of points. You know, and I think that this is a little bit of a science and an art at the end of the day. You know, and the industry as both on the cyber side and the cybersecurity insurance is going to evolve. I kind of want to take it a different angle, and I think thinking about kind of where we're going to be in the next little while, and kind of what I see happening so far is, and even with the partnership, we talked about telemetry information, and so I want to touch on what that really is. Telemetry information is information about your attack surface that gives you an idea of where your data is, what's your risk, all that stuff. The interesting part is that tells a story. And that story, you know, I believe it, you know, from Max's world in DataStream can be used to measure risk. And so, you know, I think if you think about just the insurance world in general, when it comes to vehicles, you know, there's stats on where are the most accidents that happen, like which streets and things like that, which cars are affected. You know, red cars are more expensive. I don't know if that's true anymore than black cars and things like that. And so because of the fact that, you know, the industry's just started, it's going to be really interesting where I actually do think we're going to get to a point where it's more of a pay as you go. And, you know, it'll be like those devices you put in your vehicle. If you're an aggressive driver, guess what? You pay more. If you drive to church and back every Sunday, you're not going to pay as much, right? And so I think that's overall where we're going to go in the next little while, based off of all the stuff that Max has talked about and we've kind of collaborated on in this session.
Well, I don't want to bore everyone to death with you know, a long demo, so I'll keep this short. But yeah, we're excited to show this joint partnership launching with Cavelo. This is our Cavelo joint platform. You can access this here as an MSP with Cavelo from cavelo.datastreaminsurance.com. Again, we basically built sort of a multi-tenant insurance application management system so that you as an MSP or an MSSP can easily manage your clients through the insurance application process and help them with particularly the security and technical questions that they can often struggle with. You can see here, I have an example company application to give you a sense of what the portal looks like. If I go into one of these example applications for example client, because I'm creative when it comes to names, again, we're collecting data that hopefully is aligned to better understanding customers' risks and are required right now by, you know, several dozen carriers. So through this application, we have questions on backups that you can help fill out for your customers. We have questions on MFA and encryption and software, which includes things like, you know, 0 days and patching, whether or not you have EDR and MDR for your customers, et cetera. And at the end of this process, we also run an automated gap analysis on your customers, which can be an effective tool for you to push them in the right security direction. If they're missing some controls, which based on our machine learning models we've built on thousands of applications and tens of thousands of quotes, we try to highlight what we see as particularly important features, which are questions that will influence pricing or potentially block your client from getting some of the best policies on the market. So we know some partners use this automated gap analysis as a bit of a third-party objective way of talking about upgrades or improving some of their posture. And again, all managed easily from the central place here. If you want to create a new application for your customer, it's as simple as entering in their name and how you would like DataStream to deal with them. you might want us to talk with them directly and help them fill out the application, or you might want us to stay quiet and you kind of take the lead, as well as any additional information, whether you know that they have a policy or not, and any additional information about that customer. That customer will get a link to their email that you include for them that allows them to log in and complete the application and ultimately get quotes from over 30 carriers through our platform. We also provide the ability to generate, lots of different marketing or other resources for better educating customers about cyber risk, designed for particular industry verticals, as well as links to webinars and previous things that we've done with other partners and platforms. This very webinar will be in this resources page at some point. And I guess the final thing that I could talk briefly, through this platform, you can also run some cyber insurance risk assessments on your customers. This takes like a minute to fill out, and you should get back then a PDF that helps kind of give a talking script to why they should care about cyber insurance and how do they look as a risk. And then if you are interested as well as getting tech in cyber for your business as a MSP or MSSP, we also help provide some of those services in our portal too. So like I said, I don't want to make this an overly long demo, but this is our quick platform at a snapshot. And yeah, so I guess I can stop sharing then.
Yeah, it's at least from my perspective, like I said, I used to work for DataStream several years ago, and this is stuff that that Max and his team was in the business of creating back then, and it's really cool for me to see just how it's come to life now, and how partnerships like what we've got with Cavelo are really helping the MSPs not only protect themselves, but also protect their customers. So one thing I want to do is just, anybody that's out there that in the audience that has a question for either James or Max, feel free to add it over here in the comments section. And while I'm waiting for some of those to come in, I'm also going to just, what does the future hold? And James, I'll toss it over to you. Max has been talking a little bit, but if you could look into a crystal ball, what changes in cybersecurity and cybersecurity hygiene platforms, or maybe even Cavelo in general, what do you see coming around the bend?
I think the obvious one is AI. I think we've kind of over-torqued a little bit in the sense of first off, AI is everywhere. It's on your phone, it's in vendors' software. I think you have to embrace it. I think at the end of the day, cybersecurity insurance and regulatory compliance, it's just going to be part of it. It's going to be part of the assessment. Understand all your AI components, accept what you want to allow from an AUP standpoint versus not. I think that on the other side of the coin, I think that we're going to see more sophisticated social engineering attacks. I think that you're going to find that some of it's going to be done through voice. Like, for example, on this call or on this recording, someone could get my voice and you run it through an AI engine and boom, they have my voice, right? And so I think using that in conjunction with, email and text, it just becomes more effective. And so we need to understand that, the cause and effect. And it really comes down to training humans. I said this before, 80% of breaches happen because of human error. So I think we're going to see more sophisticated attacks in the next little while, which, and arguably you can use AI to defend it as well. So yeah, that's kind of where I see things going.
Fantastic. So Max, gonna look your way and look into your crystal ball. What changes do you see coming perhaps to the underwriting process or to the insurers themselves? What changes do you see coming around the bend here over the next couple of years?
Yeah, no, I love these questions, and I'm always right about the future. So you can make sure that you listen to this and you believe it. And I'm sure the Eagles are going to win next year's Super Bowl again too. But yeah, so no, I actually think that obviously it's hard to predict the future, but I think that I think what James was saying is absolutely true. So something that I think about a lot through my parent organization, who's Envelop Risk, they care quite a lot about actually a layer above what we're talking about. So there's this entire other layer above typical insurers that you would talk about for cyber that are cyber reinsurance companies. They're quite concerned with things like global cyber events that have never happened yet, right? It's a very interesting math problem. So the nerdy side of me finds that kind of stuff quite interesting to think about. What I think we know for a fact, though, is that AI is going to continue probably picking up speed in the overall zeitgeist of the world. And unfortunately, and this is where I guess I'm slightly predictive. I think that it's a lot easier to find destructive uses with new technology than it is to find really altruistic ones right out of the box. Oftentimes, I think there are a lot of low hanging, probably disruptive new ways of scamming people that are going to be far easier with AI. Like I see every single day I see a marketing pitch, if I even go to YouTube, where it's like, hey, you can make really cool custom marketing emails that like match the voice and tone and different emotional cadences that you would talk to all these different people. If we're bringing the cost of that down almost to zero and making very convincing human text, human voice, even video, there's going to be a lot of people out there that are probably going to be exposed to a risk that they didn't have before. And therefore, I'm not going to try to predict exactly what the risks are going to be associated with AI. But I think like from the reinsurance perspective, I guess, thinking of like global things we've never seen before, it would not surprise me at all if something disrupted the cyber insurance industry over the next couple of years, because all of a sudden it turns out we had a weak spot because of something connected to AI that then we realized we need some new questions to ask or new types of data to get from your network so that we can figure out whether or not you're super susceptible to this new risk. I would say AI could enable the next ransomware, whatever that looks like. And I don't think it will necessarily, but it's a highly probable thing that if a new kind of attack vector came, AI is going to be part of it. So I think something connected to that. And then what you're going to see is probably higher prices, a little bit more volatility in the insurance world as they figure out how to renormalize. Yeah, that's probably my best guess at the future.
It sounds like you just said we've all got, those of us here in the cybersecurity arena, sounds like we got job security for quite some time. And I often joke with people that are not in the industry. They ask about what is cybersecurity, and you try to explain it to them. And I said, just basically, it's the new medical industry. It's never going away. It's always going to be there. And I think you just summed that up quite aptly, my friend. And I think we're always going to have a job. So, look, we've covered a whole lot of information here, and at least for me, the key takeaway. Again, due diligence isn't just a checkbox. It's a mindset. It's a mindset we all have to live. It's about knowing what data you have, where it resides, who's got access to it, and being able to show that you're managing all of these risks continuously. So whether you're applying brand new for cyber insurance or preparing for a renewal, I think we heard and learned that the time is now to start tightening up all of your controls, document your processes, all of that good stuff. And, I think the businesses that prioritize transparency and proactive security posture are the ones that are going to get better coverage, better premiums, and possibly even faster claims response. So I want to thank Max Henderson, the Chief Data Officer over at DataStream Insurance and good friend of mine. And I know it killed him to talk about the Philadelphia Eagles potentially winning the next Super Bowl, because I remember Max is a huge Green Bay Packers fan. And I also would like to thank James McNaca, my current CEO here at Cavelo and friend as well. And I know James is a huge hockey buff, so he's really keep an eye on what's going on in the hockey world out there. But anybody that wants to see a recording of this webinar, I am told this will be available on the same URL that you're currently watching this webinar on. And for current Cavelo customers, make sure to watch for dedicated space in our Cavelo Connect community, along with some resources dedicated to the partnership we have with DataStream. So once again, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. And to our audience out there, you've been fantastic. We've seen a lot of good questions. We've seen a lot of good comments out there. So we thank you for your time today. And as I promised, we'd make sure we'd end this on time. James, Max, if you got any closing words, if not, we'll say goodbye.
I just want to say thanks. And, Max, it's always a pleasure doing these types of talks with you. And everyone have a great day.
Yeah, really fun chat. Great chatting with you, Larry and James. Fun times.
Good stuff. Thank you, gentlemen. And thanks, everybody, for attending.